The explosion didn't sound like anything in the training manuals. It wasn't the clean crack of a grenade or the controlled boom of demo charges. It was ugly, deep and raw, tearing the earth apart with a violence that seemed personal. Dirt, smoke and shrapnel erupted into the air, slamming into the squad like a hammer dropped from the sky. Private First Class Emily Carter didn't feel the blast at first. She heard it, then there was only silence, a ringing silence so loud it drowned everything. She blinked, trying to understand why the Afghan desert had tilted sideways. Her weapon was gone. Her left arm felt wrong, heavy and slick. Warmth spread under her body, soaking the sand beneath her. Am I dying? Contact. 12 o'clock, someone screamed. The voice cracked through the ringing, ragged and desperate. Bullets chewed into the sandbags and rusted walls of the abandoned compound they had been ordered to clear. The squad scattered for cover, some firing back, some dragging the wounded. But Emily lay still, half hidden behind the edge of a collapsed wall. Dust filled her mouth. Her lungs burned. Carter's down. I can't see her. Sergeant Daniels' voice, commanding, sharp, terrified underneath. Emily wanted to answer, to shout that she was alive, but her lips moved without sound. Her chest heaved. Panic set in. She wasn't ready to die here. She hadn't even finished the letter to her mom she had started last night. A shadow darted across her vision. Staff Sergeant Mac McKinney, the squad's medic. Broad shoulders, beard speckled with dust, eyes locked in on her like radar. He slid in low, bullets sparking off metal behind him. Carter. Stay with me. She tried again to speak, but only blood bubbled at her lips. Mac ripped open his med kit with his teeth, hands already working. Tourniquet. Gauze. His voice kept talking, steady, grounding her. You're good. You're fine. I got you. Don't you dare close those eyes. Don't you dare. Around them the battle raged, shouts, automatic fire, the harsh thud of RPGs slamming somewhere to their rear. The Taliban fighters weren't letting up, and Daniels was barking orders to push left, to flank, to keep the pressure off the medic. Emily caught Mac's gaze, and something inside her fought against the darkness. She forced her throat to move. Her voice cracked, weak but sharp enough to cut through chaos. Don't let them take me. The words silenced him for half a heartbeat. His hands froze on her bandage. It wasn't fear of dying that made her speak, it was worse. The stories they'd all heard, whispered in firebases and convoys, about what happened when female soldiers were captured. Mac's jaw clenched. Then he leaned closer, voice a growl just for her. They won't. Not while I'm breathing. The day before. 24 hours earlier, the squad had been joking in the back of an MRAP, bouncing along the bone-shaking dirt road toward the compound. Emily sat wedged between Corporal Rivas and Specialist Jenkins, helmet sliding down her forehead from the jolts. Sweat pooled under her body armor, and she pretended not to notice Rivas trying to balance a can of dip on the dash despite every bump tossing it. You think this place'll be empty? Jenkins asked, scratching his chin. Daniels, riding shotgun, turned and gave him that. Are you an idiot? Kid, nothing's ever empty out here. If intel says it's clear, it means there's at least 20 dudes with AKs waiting for us. The squad laughed, even Emily, though her stomach twisted. She'd been in Afghanistan for 4 months now, long enough to know Daniels wasn't exaggerating. You ready for your first real sweep, Carter? Rivas teased, nudging her with an elbow. Emily adjusted her rifle, masking nerves with a smirk. Ready enough to drag your sorry ass back when you trip the first wire. The truck erupted in laughter, Rivas shaking his head. She's got jokes. Careful, rookie, that kind of mouth'll get you promoted. Even Mac chuckled, though his eyes stayed on the window, scanning the horizon. Emily had noticed he didn't laugh much, and when he did, it was never careless. Like everything he did, it had purpose. Back to the firefight. The firefight didn't care about jokes or nerves. It was pure survival. The Taliban fighters had dug into hardened positions across the wadi, cutting off retreat and hammering the squad with suppressing fire. Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. Bravo team, push left. Jenkins, cover fire. We're not dying here. The squad moved like a machine. Years of training and weeks of fighting had welded them together. Every choice Daniels made had weight. If they pushed too fast, more bodies would drop. If they hesitated, they'd be pinned until mortars found them. And in the middle of it, Mac knelt over Emily, hands blood slick, trying to decide whether to drag her now or keep pressure on the wound. Both choices had consequences. Damn it, Carter, you picked a hell of a time to nap, Mac muttered, trying for humor, but his eyes were dead serious. Her vision flickered in and out. She caught flashes, Jenkins spraying fire into a window, Rivas hauling ammo belts, Daniels vaulting rubble like he was still 21. Every second someone chose life or death. Mac made his choice. With one hand he cinched the last bandage, with the other he grabbed her vest and hauled. Bullets snapped overhead, dirt spitting into their faces, but he dragged her back toward the inner wall of the compound. His breathing was a growl, sweat carving channels through the grime on his face. When they reached relative cover, he propped her against the wall and checked her pulse again. Still with me? Good. Don't move. Not that you can. Emily coughed weakly. Blood flecked her lips. You, always this gentle? He barked a laugh despite himself. Oh, she still got sass. Yeah, you'll live. Daniels' decision. At the other end of the compound, Sergeant Daniels crouched low, trying to map the fight in his head. His men were holding but barely. The enemy had numbers and higher ground. If they didn't break the flank soon, they'd be boxed in. He slammed a fresh mag into his M4 and keyed his radio. Hammer 2-1, this is Reaper 3 Bravo, requesting immediate air support, grid coordinates. Static. The blast had knocked out comms. Daniels swore. No air support, no reinforcements. Just them. He scanned the squad, Jenkins firing controlled bursts, Rivas grinning like a lunatic as he lobbed grenades, Patel crawling forward with the saw. And Carter, their rookie, pale and bleeding, with Mac hunched over her like a guard dog. He made his call. Patel? Jenkins? With me, we take that left building now? It was reckless. It was the only option. The push. The three soldiers sprinted low across open ground, enemy rounds snapping past their helmets. Dust filled their mouths, adrenaline flooding their veins. Patel laid down a wall of fire, Jenkins reloaded with frantic precision, and Daniels kicked the door of the mud brick building so hard it splintered off its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of cordite. Two fighters spun, eyes wide, AKs half raised. Daniels didn't hesitate. His rifle barked twice, dropping them before they could scream. They cleared room by room, grenades and gunfire echoing, until the second floor gave them the vantage point they needed. From there, Patel saw chewed across the wadi, tearing into the enemy positions. The tide shifted. Emily's fight. Back behind cover, Emily fought for every breath. Mac kept talking, his voice a lifeline. You'll have a scar, sure. Chicks dig scars though, right? Hell, maybe you'll finally impress Rivas. Her laugh came out as a wheeze. Not my type. Good. Saves me trouble. Her head lolled, eyelids heavy. The sound of battle faded, replaced by the pounding of her heartbeat. But she remembered what she'd said, don't let them take me. That fear gnawed deeper than the wound. She forced her eyes open again, found Max. Promise me. He met her gaze without flinching. I already did. Turning point. Daniels' push worked. With the building secured and Patel suppressing fire tearing through the enemy line, the Taliban began to falter. A few broke cover, sprinting across the wadi only to be cut down. Others pulled back, fading into the hills. Within 20 minutes, the battlefield fell eerily quiet. Smoke drifted. Spent casings glinted in the sand. The squad regrouped, battered but breathing. Daniel's voice was hoarse. Check ammo. Check each other. Jenkins, set perimeter. Rivas, get that comms unit working. Mac, status on Carter? Mac didn't look up from his work. She's alive. Barely. We need evac now or she's gone. The radio crackled, faint but alive. Rivas hooped. Got it? We got comms. Daniel snatched the handset. Relief ward with exhaustion. Reaper 3 Bravo to Hammer 2-1. We need medevac priority 1. I got a soldier down bad. The silence. Minutes dragged. The squad held the compound, weapons ready, nerves stretched thin. Emily drifted in and out, hearing fragments of voices, footsteps crunching, the distant thud of rotors finally approaching. When the Black Hawk appeared over the ridge, sunlight glinting off its rotors, relief washed through the squad like water on fire. Dust blasted the compound as it descended. Mac and Daniels lifted Emily onto the stretcher, securing her straps. Her eyes fluttered open one last time as they carried her. The medic leaned close, his words steady, unwavering. You're going home, Carter. You fought hard. You're one of us now. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. Then she whispered something, so soft only Mac heard it. His eyes widened, surprise flickering across his face. Whatever she said, he didn't repeat. Not to Daniels, not to anyone. He just nodded once, grim and sure. The helicopter lifted off, carrying Emily away in a storm of dust, and the squad watched in silence. The Black Hawk thundered away into the Afghan sky, leaving a storm of dust swirling in its wake. Sergeant Daniels squinted through the haze, rifle slung but eyes sharp, as though expecting the enemy to surge back the moment their guard dropped. For a few seconds the squad just stood there in the silence, breathing hard, sweat dripping, rifles trembling slightly in tired hands. The firefight had lasted less than an hour, but it had stolen years off all their lives. "All right," Daniels barked finally, snapping them out of it. "Circle up. Jenkins, ammo check. Patel, you're on overwatch. Rivas, start policing bodies for intel. Phones, maps, anything. We don't leave this compound until I say so." Nobody argued. They'd seen what happened to soldiers who argued when adrenaline wore off. Hesitation, mistakes, death. Orders were safety. Orders were routine. Max stood apart, his med bag open, blood staining his sleeves. He stared at the dust still hanging in the air where the helicopter had disappeared. His ears rang not from gunfire but from Emily's final words, words so quiet they could have been imagined. Except he knew he hadn't imagined them. "Tell my mom. I wasn't scared." The words haunted him. She had been terrified, he'd seen it in her eyes, heard it in the broken rasp when she begged not to be taken. And yet, in the end, she wanted her mother to believe courage had carried her. Mac knew that lie could be more important than the truth. And now it was his to keep. The SEALs arrived. An hour later, just as the squad settled into the grim routine of checking their dead and tending their wounded pride, the distinctive growl of armored vehicles echoed from the road. Dust plumes rose before the column came into view, Mavs bristling with guns, American flags snapping in the wind. "About damn time," Rivas muttered, wiping grime from his brow. But as the convoy rolled closer, Daniels noticed something odd. These weren't regular army. The vehicles were too slick, the posture of the men too relaxed, too confident. When the lead MATV stopped and its door swung open, Daniels' suspicions were confirmed. The man who stepped out wore no standard insignia. His uniform was scrubbed of identifiers, his beard longer than regs allowed, his movements coiled with lethal ease. A Navy SEAL. "Sergeant Daniels?" the operator asked, voice low but carrying. "That's me." Daniels stepped forward, guarded. The SEAL gave a curt nod. "Lieutenant Briggs. We were running a parallel op in the sector. Caught your call on the net. Figured we'd lend a hand." "Little late for that," Rivas muttered under his breath, earning a glare from Daniels. Briggs ignored it, scanning the compound, the bodies, the bullet holes still smoking. Then his gaze landed on Mac, still crouched near the blood-stained patch of dirt where Emily had fallen. "Who's your medic?" Mac stood slowly. "Staff Sergeant McKinney." Briggs studied him for a long moment. Something passed between them, a soldier's recognition of another who'd seen too much. Then Briggs nodded once, almost respectfully. "You kept her alive long enough to evac. Not many could have." Max shrugged, uncomfortable under the praise. "Not enough. She still might not make it." Briggs' lips twitched. "Sometimes that's not our call." Tension in the ranks. The SEALs swept the area with unnerving efficiency, securing perimeters, checking bodies, moving with the kind of casual confidence that came from fighting a different kind of war. They weren't burdened by the same rules, the same paperwork, the same chains tugging at army boots. And that nod at Daniels. His squad had nearly been shredded, left to bleed in a mud-brick hellhole, while these guys showed up late, polished and smug. He gathered his squad in the shadow of a wall. "Listen up. We don't answer to them. We don't tag along. We finish our op and pull out as ordered." "Understood." "Yes, Sergeant," came the murmurs, though Rivas rolled his eyes. Briggs approached mid-briefing, his shadow cutting across the group. "You've stirred a hornet's nest here. Taliban won't take losing this compound lightly. You might want to hitch a ride with us." Daniels bristled. "Appreciate the offer, Lieutenant, but we can handle ourselves." Briggs raised a brow. "With one of your soldiers bleeding out on a bird right now?" Daniels' jaw tightened. "We handle our own." The SEAL studied him, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. But when the Hornets come back, don't say I didn't warn you." Back at base. By nightfall, the squad was back at FOB Kestrel, a sprawling, dust-choked base ringed with HESCO barriers and concertina wire. The moment they stepped off the convoy, exhaustion hit like a physical blow. Rivas collapsed onto a cot, muttering about needing a smoke. Jenkins moved robotically, cleaning his rifle with trembling hands. Patel buried himself in reports, his way of coping with chaos. Daniels marched them through debrief like a man fueled solely by spite and caffeine. He wanted every detail recorded, every bullet accounted for. Paperwork was armor, it kept grief at bay. But Mac couldn't sit still. He paced the edges of the medic tent, replaying Emily's whisper in his head. Tell my mom. I wasn't scared. She hadn't said if I die. She'd said it as though she already knew she was gone. That bothered him more than the blood. The call. Hours later, Daniels found Mac sitting alone by the satellite phone, staring at it like it was a weapon. You calling someone? Daniels asked. Mac didn't look up. Her mom. Daniels stiffened. That's not your job. Casualty notification comes through official channels. Chaplains, officers. She asked me. The words hung heavy. Daniels knew regulations, but he also knew soldiers. A dying request wasn't something you ignored. After a long silence, he sighed. Don't tell her anything you can't promise. Mac nodded. His fingers trembled as he dialed, the hum of the sat phone filling the tent. Then a voice answered, raw with static. Hello? Mrs. Carter? This is Staff Sergeant McKinney. I served with your daughter. A pause, then a sharp intake of breath. Is she? Did something happen? Mac swallowed. His throat was dry. She was wounded today. But she fought hard. She's alive. She's on her way to Germany now for treatment. Oh God! The woman's voice broke, a sob muffled through the line. My baby. Mac closed his eyes, remembering Emily's blood on his hands. She wanted me to tell you something. She wanted you to know, she wasn't scared. The silence on the other end was crushing. Then came the sound of quiet crying, broken words of thanks. Mac sat in the tent long after the call ended, the weight of the lie pressing heavier than his rifle ever had. The SEAL medic. 2 days later, word spread through the base. Emily had made it to Germany, alive but in critical condition. That same afternoon, Lieutenant Briggs returned to Kestrel, this time with his SEAL medic, Chief Petty Officer Ryan Doc Harlow. The man was lean, sharp-eyed, with hands that looked like they'd rebuilt more soldiers than they'd killed. He found Mac in the aid station restocking gauze. You're McKinney? Yeah. You kept her alive out there. Impressive work. Mac shook his head. I patched holes. That's it. Harlow studied him, then smiled faintly. You sound like me 10 years ago. You'll learn, sometimes patching holes is the difference between life and death. There was no arrogance in his tone, just weary certainty. For the first time in days, Mac felt like someone understood. The return to the field. The squad didn't get long to breathe. A week later, orders came down. Push into the same sector, deeper this time. The Taliban weren't retreating, they were regrouping. Daniels gathered the squad, faces lit by the pale glow of a single lamp. We go back out tomorrow. Sameo. Intel says they're massing fighters near the riverbed. Command wants us to confirm and disrupt. Groans rippled. Rivas muttered something about déjà vu. Mac spoke for the first time. Carter's barely out of surgery and we're heading back to the same kill zone? Daniel's eyes hardened. That's the job. We don't get to pick the fight. But Mac noticed something he hadn't before, hesitation. Daniels was good at hiding it, but the weight of every choice was stacking up on his shoulders. Night before battle. The squad prepped in silence that night, each man lost in thought. Jenkins wrote in his journal, scratching furiously like he had to trap every memory before it slipped away. Patel checked and rechecked his saw, muttering equations under his breath as though math could shield him. Rivas played cards alone, dealing to invisible opponents, his grin forced. Mac cleaned his med bag, hand steady, mind racing. He thought of Emily, her fear, her whisper, the promise he carried. He wondered if she'd make it. If she did, what would she think of them coming back here again? Daniels walked the perimeter, stopping to check each man's gear, offering small nods of approval. He didn't talk about Emily. He didn't have to. She was there in all their minds, a ghost in dusty boots. Dawn. The next morning, before the sun fully cleared the mountains, the squad rolled out again. Engines rumbled, dust rose, and silence weighed heavier than armor. As the MRAPs bumped along the familiar road, Rivas tried breaking the tension. So, anyone else think this is starting to feel like Groundhog Day? Nobody laughed. Mac adjusted the straps on his pack, eyes scanning the horizon. His gut twisted. Something felt different this time. Worse. Daniel sat up front, headset crackling with comms chatter. His hand tapped against his rifle, a nervous tick he'd never had before. He knew what the men didn't. Intel had mentioned possible foreign fighters joining the Taliban unit. That meant training. That meant discipline. That meant the next fight wouldn't be a simple ambush. The MRAP crested a ridge and the valley spread before them. Quiet, too quiet. Fields of scrub grass rippled in the wind, the river glinting like glass. Patel's voice broke the silence. Sergeant? I don't like this. Daniels lifted his binoculars, scanning. His stomach sank. Shadows moved near the treeline, too organized, too patient. He lowered the glasses. His voice was grim. Everyone lock and load. We're about to earn our pay again. The first RPG streaked out of the trees a second later. The rocket-propelled grenade screamed across the valley like a vengeful comet. Daniels had just enough time to bark, brace, before it slammed into the dirt 15 meters ahead of the convoy. The explosion lifted sand and metal skyward, rocking the lead MRAP off its wheels. Shrapnel rattled against armor, whining like angry hornets. The valley erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes sparked from the treeline, dozens of them, disciplined volleys instead of the usual wild bursts. This wasn't a ragtag ambush. These fighters were trained. Inside the second MRAP, Mac felt the blast slam into his chest like a sledgehammer. The vehicle jolted, tires grinding into the dirt. His ears rang, but training took over. He shoved his med pack tight against his side, grabbed his rifle and shouted over the chaos. Everyone out. Move. The squad spilled into the open, taking what little cover the shallow ridges offered. Bullets carved into the dirt, snapping overhead. The air reeked of cordite, oil, and blood. Daniels hit the ground running, barking orders between bursts from his M4. Patel set that saw on the ridge. Jenkins, smoke out the treeline. Rivas, flank right with me. Mac, stick close, we're gonna need you. The squad scrambled to comply, each movement a gamble under the rain of bullets. Patel belly crawled up a slope, dragging the saw, his teeth clenched as he set the bipod and unleashed a stream of 5.56. The gun chattered, spitting brass and fire, cutting arcs through the treeline. Smoke grenades hissed, vomiting white clouds that billowed across the field. It bought seconds, precious, fleeting seconds. Daniels gamble. Daniels slammed into cover beside Rivas, breathing hard. His brain raced faster than the bullets. They were outnumbered, pinned in a shallow valley, comms patchy at best. If they stayed, they'd be chewed up. If they ran, they'd be cut down in the open. He scanned the treeline through his sight. Figures darted in and out, disciplined, coordinated. He counted at least 25, maybe more. And something about their movements gnawed at him. They weren't just Taliban. They were better. Foreign fighters. Has to be. Daniel spat grit, then keyed his radio. Bravo squad, listen up. We're punching left. Rivas and I'll push the flank, draw fire. Patel, keep pressure up top. Jenkins, cover the advance. Mac, watch R6. We move on my mark. Sergeant, that's suicide, Patel snapped between bursts. Everything else is worse, Daniels growled. Mac's burden. Mac crouched low, adrenaline tearing through him. His rifle was ready, but his mind stayed half on the med pack strapped to his side. Every fight blurred together, but every scream of the wounded cut sharp. He remembered Emily's whisper, the weight of the promise he'd made. He couldn't let another soldier bleed out in his hands. Not today. Rivas slid in next to him, grinning through the chaos. Hey, document. You patch me up if I get ventilated? Max scowled. Not if you keep smiling like an idiot. Rivas laughed, then popped up to fire a burst. His confidence wasn't bravado, it was madness, the kind that kept men alive when logic said they shouldn't be. Mark. Daniels roared. The push. The squad surged left. Daniels and Rivas fired on the move, short bursts snapping, while Jenkins and Patel laid down suppressing fire. The smoke provided cover, but it also disoriented. Shadows flickered, muzzle flashes blurred. Bullets cracked past Mac's ears, close enough he swore he felt the air peel back. His boots pounded dirt, lungs burning as he stuck tight to the formation. An RPG whooshed from the treeline, cutting through the smoke. It slammed into the ridge behind Patel, the blast tossing dirt like a geyser. Patel coughed, shaken but alive, and kept firing. Daniel saw the gap, an opening in the treeline where the fire was thickest but disorganized. He pointed with his rifle. There. Push through. They crashed forward, bullets hissing past, until they slammed into the base of the treeline. The fight turned brutal, up close and personal. Close quarters. The first fighter came charging through the smoke, AK spitting. Daniels dropped him with a double tap, pivoted, and put another round into the second. Rivas lunged from cover, firing wild, his laughter turning feral as bodies dropped. Mac caught movement to his right, a man lunging with a blade, teeth bared. Mac's rifle jammed on an empty mag. He didn't hesitate. He swung the stock like a club, smashing the man across the jaw, then drew his pistol and put 2 rounds into his chest. He stood panting, heart hammering. Training and instinct had saved him, but his hands shook. He jammed a new mag into his rifle, forcing focus. Patel dragged the saw into the tree-line, setting it against a stump. He opened fire at near point blank, mowing down fighters scrambling through the smoke. Jenkins kept low, methodically clearing angles, every shot precise. For the first time, his calm steadiness reminded Mac of Daniels. The firefight turned into a brawl. The valley was chaos, screams, gunfire, smoke, dust. The SEALs enter. Just as Daniels thought they might be overrun, a new sound cut through the battlefield, the heavy, disciplined thup-thup-thup of suppressed fire. Enemy fighters dropped mid-charge, heads snapping back, bodies crumpling. From the left flank, silhouettes emerged, SEALs moving like ghosts through smoke. Lieutenant Briggs led them, weapon steady, voice cold. "Thought you could use a hand." Daniels' jaw tightened. "Took you long enough." Briggs smirked, firing without looking. "You're welcome." With the SEALs joining, the fight shifted. Their precision and coordination shredded the enemy line, forcing the Taliban to retreat deeper into the tree-line. But the enemy didn't scatter like usual, they regrouped, disciplined, pulling back in order. "They're not done," Briggs warned. "This is round one." Aftermath of the clash. The smoke cleared, leaving the ground littered with bodies, brass, and blood. The valley stank of death. Daniels pulled the squad together, counting heads. Miraculously, none were down, though Patel's arm bled from shrapnel and Rivas had a graze across his temple. Mac was already working, patching them both with quick, practiced movements. "Doc," Daniels said quietly. "Anyone worse?" Mac shook his head. "Just scratches this time." But his gut twisted. It wouldn't stay that way. Briggs approached, calm as if he'd just finished a jog. Intel was right. Foreign fighters. Chechens by the look of them. Daniels frowned. "You sure?" Briggs gestured at one of the bodies. The gear was newer, cleaner. The movements had been professional. This wasn't just Taliban, they had allies now. Daniels muttered a curse. "That explains the discipline." Briggs studied him. "Your squad held up." "Surprising, considering." Daniels bristled. "Considering what?" "Considering most line units would have broken." The word stung, but Daniels didn't rise to it. He looked at his squad, exhausted, bloody but alive. "We're not most units." Night in the valley. Command ordered them to hold the position overnight until reinforcements arrived. The squad dug in, setting perimeter security, rationing ammo. The valley, once loud with gunfire, now hummed with an eerie silence. Max sat by the fireless circle they'd made, hands busy cleaning blood from his gear. Across from him, Briggs SEAL medic, Doc Harlow, stitched Patel's arm under dim red light. "You did good back there," Harlow said casually. Max shrugged. "Didn't lose anyone." "That's good enough." Harlow tied off the stitch, looked at him. "That's the medic curse, isn't it? We don't celebrate wins. We just carry the losses." Mac didn't answer. He thought of Emily. Later, when the squad tried to sleep, Mac stayed awake, staring at the stars. The night air was cold, sharp. And in the silence, he thought he heard her whisper again. "Tell my mom I wasn't scared." Daniel's burden. Daniel sat alone on the ridge, scanning the tree-line through NVGs. Every rustle set his nerves on edge. He replayed the fight, every choice, every risk. They'd survived, but barely. He thought about what Briggs had said, most line units would have broken. Was that supposed to be praise? Or a warning? Daniels had seen men break before. He couldn't let it happen here. Not to this squad. His radio crackled faintly, command ordering them to push deeper tomorrow. Daniels closed his eyes, the weight pressing heavier than his armor. His men needed rest, healing time. But the war didn't wait. He looked back at the squad, Patel dozing, Rivas muttering in his sleep, Jenkins scribbling by dim light, Max staring at the sky. They trusted him. And that trust felt like a blade at his throat. Foreshadow of what's coming. Near dawn, distant gunfire echoed from the mountains, short bursts, then silence. Scouts maybe. Or another squad in trouble. Briggs appeared beside Daniels, silent until he spoke. "They'll be back. And next time they won't just test you." Daniels didn't look at him. "Then we'll be ready." Briggs' tone was almost pitying. "You better be." As the sun rose, casting blood-red light across the valley, Mac tightened the straps on his med pack. Patel cleaned the saw. Rivas stretched, grinning despite bruises. Jenkins closed his journal, eyes dark but steady. Daniels stood tall, jaw set, carrying the weight of them all. The war hadn't ended with Emily's evacuation. It had only deepened. And the words she'd whispered still haunted Mac, shaping every choice he made. The night had turned into a haunting symphony of gunfire and distant explosions. Every breath carried the acrid tang of cordite and smoke. Dust lingered, suspended in the hot Afghan air, stirred only by the wind whispering over jagged rocks. Sergeant Elena Ramirez crouched behind a jagged wall of half-collapsed stone, her left hand pressed hard against her bleeding thigh. The bullet wound burned, her legs stiff and trembling with each attempt to shift her weight. She clenched her teeth, refusing to let out a sound. The silence was survival. Across from her, Corporal Davis whispered into the comms, sweat dripping down his temple despite the chill creeping over the valley. "Command, this is Viper 2. We're pinned by sustained enemy fire. 1 Kia 1 WIA. Repeat, Ramirez is wounded but stable. We need extraction, over." The reply crackled faint and broken, distant through the static. "Viper 2, negative on air support. Too hot in your sector. Extraction, compromised. Hold position until dawn." The words landed like stones. Hold position until dawn. In this killing ground? Davis looked at Ramirez, his eyes flashing with frustration. "We won't make it until dawn," he muttered, lowering his rifle just long enough to reload. Ramirez exhaled sharply, tightening the makeshift tourniquet around her thigh. Her fingers were numb, slick with her own blood. "Then we move," she said, voice hard but low. "We can't wait here for them to tighten the noose." "Move where?" Davis asked, gesturing with his head toward the ridge line. Muzzle flashes still flickered like fireflies from enemy positions above. "They've got the high ground. It's a meat grinder." Ramirez swallowed, her throat dry. "There's the river," she whispered. "Flows north, cuts through the canyon. If we get to it, maybe we can slip out under cover of the rocks. It's loud enough to mask movement." Davis hesitated. The river meant plunging into freezing water in the dead of night, with a wounded NCO who could barely walk. But waiting here meant certain death. "All right," he said finally, snapping his rifle back to ready. "We move on your mark, Sarge." The breakout. Ramirez grit her teeth and forced herself upright, leaning heavily on the ruined wall as she steadied her rifle. Suppressing fire, 3-second bursts. "Then we sprint." Davis nodded, then leaned over the rubble, his weapon spitting controlled bursts into the darkness. Enemy tracers streaked back in response, shattering stone inches from his head. "Go," Ramirez hissed. She pushed off the wall, her bad leg screaming in agony. She staggered, nearly collapsing, but momentum carried her forward. Davis was beside her in seconds, his arms slung under her shoulder, half carrying her as they dashed across the open ground. Rounds cracked past their ears, snapping into the dirt at their feet. A heavy machine gun opened up from above, chewing the earth into sprays of dust and sparks. "Down?" Davis yelled, shoving Ramirez flat as the wall behind them erupted under gunfire. They crawled on elbows and knees, dragging themselves toward the jagged slope leading down to the river. Each inch felt like a mile, every second stretched taut with the certainty that the next bullet would find them. Finally they reached the lip of the canyon. The river below roared, black water thrashing against boulders, white foam glowing faint under the fractured moonlight. Davis glanced at Ramirez. "You up for this?" Her lips twitched into a grim half-smile. "Do I have a choice?" He shook his head. "Didn't think so." They slid down the rocky incline, dirt and gravel tearing at their palms. Ramirez grunted as pain shot through her leg, but she bit back the scream. Silence was survival. Baptism in the river. The water hit like knives, icy, merciless, pulling them instantly downstream. Ramirez gasped, the shock almost forcing her to release her grip on the rock she had caught. "Stay with me," Davis shouted, barely audible over the roaring current. He latched onto her vest with one hand, the other flailing for purchase against jagged stones as the current dragged them deeper into the canyon. The river became their shield, drowning out their noise, hiding them beneath its furious surface. But it was also their executioner, threatening to dash them against rocks at every turn. Ramirez felt her strength waning, her wounded leg thrashing uselessly in the current. Water filled her nose, her lungs burning as she coughed and sputtered. "Can't," she choked, but Davis's iron grip never let her slip away. He dragged her toward a jutting boulder, slamming his shoulder into it with bruising force. Pain radiated through him, but he locked his arm around Ramirez, keeping her head above water. "Breathe," he shouted, his own chest heaving. "You breathe, damn it." Ramirez coughed up river water, choking on the cold. But she obeyed. She breathed. For what felt like hours, the river carried them north, its freezing embrace numbing her body, dulling even the throbbing fire in her leg. Finally, Davis spotted a narrow bank where the rocks formed a small natural alcove. With the last reserves of his strength, he hauled Ramirez from the river, both of them collapsing in the mud, shivering violently. Shadows in the trees. The canyon narrowed here, with sparse trees clawing at the sky above. Moonlight painted everything in silver and black. For a moment, there was only silence, the rushing water behind them and their ragged breaths. Then Ramirez stiffened. She had heard it too, voices. Faint, speaking in Pashto, drifting from the ridge above. Davis pressed himself into the mud, heart hammering. The Taliban fighters had tracked them to the river. They weren't safe. Not yet. Ramirez's hand found her rifle, though her fingers shook. She leaned close to Davis, whispering, "If they find us, don't let them take me." His jaw tightened. "Don't talk like that. Promise me," she pressed, eyes fierce despite her exhaustion. Davis didn't answer. He couldn't. Above, the voices grew louder. Flashlights bobbed like fireflies along the ridge. The enemy was searching. The two soldiers pressed flat against the earth, barely daring to breathe. Minutes passed like hours until finally, mercifully, the voices began to fade. The searchers moved farther upriver, convinced the current had carried their quarry away. Ramirez exhaled slowly, tension bleeding out of her in a shudder. That was too close. "Yeah," Davis muttered, scanning the ridge. "Way too close." Fire and humor. Exhaustion weighed heavy, but they couldn't stop. With dawn creeping closer, every moment mattered. They limped along the riverbank, Davis supporting Ramirez, both soaked and shivering. To distract her from the pain, he tried for humor. "You know, I was hoping my Saturday night would involve a hot shower, maybe a poker game. Not nearly drowning with my boss in an Afghan river." Ramirez let out a breathless laugh, half choked by pain. "You think this counts as bonding time?" "Definitely going in the report," Davis said with a crooked grin. "Under team-building exercise." "Make sure you add the part where I saved your ass with one good leg," she shot back. Yeah. You'll get a medal. I'll get therapy bills." Their laughter was soft, strained, but real. For a moment, it was enough to push back the fear. Decision point. As the first blush of dawn touched the canyon walls, Davis spotted smoke in the distance, thin, curling against the pale sky. A village. Ramirez followed his gaze, her brow furrowing. "Could be friendly, could be hostile. Could be our only shot," Davis replied. They both knew the risk. Villages in this valley were often contested, their loyalties shifting with survival. Some hid American soldiers. Others handed them straight to the Taliban. "What's the play, Sarge?" Davis asked. Ramirez's eyes narrowed, weighing the choice. Every decision had consequences. If they went to the village and it was hostile, they'd die, or worse. If they stayed in the wild, Ramirez's wound would kill her before long. Finally, she drew in a steady breath. "We head to the village. But we go cautious. No uniforms showing, weapons ready." Davis nodded, grim but resolute. "Copy that." The village at dawn. They approached through the brush, keeping low. The village was small, mud brick houses clustered around a single dirt road, smoke rising from cooking fires. A dog barked in the distance, startling Ramirez into clutching Davis's arm. Children ran barefoot through the dust, their laughter oddly at peace with the violence of the land. An old man sat outside a doorway mending a fishing net. It looked so ordinary. So deceptively ordinary. "Looks quiet," Davis whispered. "Too quiet," Ramirez muttered, scanning every rooftop for glints of metal, every shadow for movement. As they crept closer, a young boy spotted them from the road. His eyes widened and he sprinted into the village shouting. Ramirez and Davis froze, rifles raised. From the nearest house, a woman emerged, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp. She studied them silently for a long moment. Then, without a word, she beckoned, the door closed behind them with a heavy thud. The mud brick walls swallowed the early light, leaving only a dim interior lit by a single hanging lantern. The air smelled of wood smoke and herbs, mixed with the earthy damp of clay. Sergeant Elena Ramirez felt her throat tighten. Every nerve screamed that she just stepped into a trap. Her hand never left her rifle, finger hovering close to the trigger guard. Corporal Davis stood at her side, his jaw rigid, his own weapon aimed low but ready. The old woman who had beckoned them inside moved slowly, her scarf brushing the floor as she shuffled toward a low table. Without a word, she poured water into a clay bowl and set it before them. Ramirez's eyes narrowed. "Why water? Why now?" The woman raised her hand, palm outward as if to say peace. But peace was a luxury neither of them could trust. The stranger's silence. Ramirez exchanged a quick glance with Davis. "We can't stay long," she whispered in English, her voice rough. Davis kept his gaze fixed on the doorway, shoulders coiled tight. "You think she's stalling?" "I think she's testing us," Ramirez muttered. The woman turned her gaze on Ramirez, her eyes dark and unblinking. She said something in Pashto, soft, deliberate. Ramirez caught only fragments. Years of deployments had given her scraps of the language, enough to understand pieces, never enough for fluency. The words carried a weight. Wounded, soldiers, not safe here. The old woman lifted a corner of Ramirez's torn pant leg, exposing the blood-soaked bandage. Ramirez stiffened but didn't pull away. The woman clicked her tongue softly, then disappeared into another room. For several tense moments, Ramirez and Davis stood frozen in the dim silence. "Could be getting help," Davis said under his breath. "Could be calling fighters," Ramirez countered. "Yeah. Either way we're sitting ducks." The healer. The door curtain rustled. The woman returned, this time carrying a bundle of herbs, strips of clean cloth and a small clay jar. She set them on the table, then looked directly at Ramirez and pointed firmly to the ground. "She wants you to sit," Davis murmured. Ramirez hesitated. To sit meant vulnerability. To let a stranger touch her wound could mean poison or a knife slipped between ribs. But her thigh throbbed with a fire she couldn't ignore. Blood loss had left her light-headed, her strength waning. "Cover me," she muttered, lowering herself slowly onto the mat. The old woman knelt, peeling back Ramirez's makeshift tourniquet. Ramirez sucked in a sharp breath as fresh pain seared through her leg. The woman's hands were steady, practiced. She washed the wound with water that stung like fire, then pressed a poultice of crushed leaves and roots against it. Ramirez's instincts screamed don't trust her, but another part of her, the part that had survived long enough to see 100 battlefields, recognized skilled hands when she felt them. The woman worked silently, binding the herbs in place with clean cloth. When she finished, she met Ramirez's eyes again and whispered in halting English. "No safe here. Soldiers come. Soon. A village divided." Davis frowned, lowering his rifle slightly. "What does that mean?" "She's saying the Taliban's coming," Ramirez whispered. The old woman pointed toward the north wall of the house, tapping it with her hand. Then she mimed walking, fingers like legs scuttling across her palm. "She wants us to leave through the back," Davis said, piecing it together. Ramirez studied the woman's lined face, trying to read truth in the shadows of her eyes. Was this kindness, or a carefully set stage for their execution? But there wasn't time to debate. From outside, distant shouts drifted through the early light. The sound of engines followed, the growl of trucks grinding over the dirt road. Ramirez's pulse spiked. "They're here." The old woman pressed a hand firmly to Ramirez's shoulder, urging her to stay still for one more moment. Then she rose, shuffled to the door and slipped outside. Davis swore under his breath. "That's it. She sold us out." "Or she's covering for us," Ramirez countered. Through the cracks in the wooden doorframe, they glimpsed her standing calmly in the road as 3 pickup trucks rolled into the village. Dust billowed behind them. Armed men spilled out, rifles slung, voices harsh and demanding. The old woman raised her hands, shaking her head, her voice sharp but unwavering. She pointed downriver, away from the house. "She's throwing them off," Davis whispered, disbelief etched on his face. "Or buying us seconds," Ramirez muttered. "Either way we move." The back exit. They slipped to the back of the house, crouching low. Ramirez grit her teeth against the pain as she limped, Davis supporting most of her weight. The rear wall had a low wooden hatch, barely large enough for them to crawl through. They pushed it open, revealing a narrow alley choked with brush and old stones. Ramirez pulled herself through, dirt grinding into her palms. Davis followed, then quickly checked their rear before helping her up. Shouts erupted from the main road. The Taliban fighters were spreading out, searching. "North Ridge," Ramirez whispered, pointing. "We get elevation, maybe signal command." "Copy." Davis adjusted his grip under her arm, and together they limped toward the rocky outcroppings behind the village. Hunter and hunted. The climb was brutal. Ramirez's legs screamed with every step, sweat pouring down her face despite the morning chill. Davis kept a steady pace, pulling her when she faltered. Below them the village grew smaller. They could see the fighters fanning out, rifles at the ready. Dogs barked, pulling at leashes as they sniffed the ground. "Damn it, they've got dogs," Davis muttered. Ramirez forced herself onward, refusing to let fear control her. "Then we stay ahead. Higher ground." They reached a cluster of jagged rocks near the ridge. Davis helped her down behind them, then raised his rifle, scanning the village below. The fighters were spreading closer, their shouts carrying on the wind. Ramirez unclipped her radio, static hissing in her ear. She pressed the button. Viper 2 to command. We are compromised, pinned near civilian village north sector. Need immediate support, over. Only static answered. She tried again, louder this time. Command, this is Viper 2. Do you copy? Static. Ramirez closed her eyes briefly, then shoved the radio back into her vest. Signal's dead out here. Davis cursed, gripping his rifle tighter. So it's just us. A soldier's burden. Ramirez's breathing grew ragged. Blood seeped slowly through the fresh bandage, her strength fading with every heartbeat. Yet her eyes burned with determination. Listen, she said, voice low but fierce. If they find us, we hold as long as we can. No surrender. Davis's head snapped toward her. Don't start that crap again. You know what they do to prisoners, Ramirez said sharply. Better we fight until. Stop. Davis's voice was steel. He gripped her shoulder. You're not dying here. Not like this. I'm not burying another teammate in this godforsaken canyon. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the shouts below. Ramirez's hard expression softened, if only a fraction. You're stubborn as hell, Corporal, she muttered. Guess I learned from the best. Despite herself, she let out a short, shaky laugh. The first skirmish. A sharp crack split the air, a rifle shot. Dirt sprayed inches from Davis's head. Contact, he shouted, dragging Ramirez lower behind the rocks. Shadows moved along the slope below, two fighters advancing fast, rifles raised. Davis fired first, controlled bursts snapping through the morning air. One fighter dropped, tumbling down the slope. The other ducked behind cover, answering with a spray of bullets that chipped stone above their heads. Ramirez raised her rifle, steadying it against the rock despite her trembling arms. She squeezed the trigger once, twice. The second shot found its mark. The fighter collapsed silently. Her arms lowered, shaking violently. She forced herself to breathe. 2 down. More coming. Davis scanned below. Sure enough, more shadows emerged, 5, maybe 6, advancing cautiously up the ridge. We can't hold here long, Davis muttered. Then we bleed them for every step, Ramirez said, chambering another round. Fire and fury. The ridge exploded with gunfire. Davis and Ramirez traded bursts, picking targets, keeping their heads low as bullets cracked past. The fighters pressed closer, their shouts rising. Every round mattered. Every decision, when to shoot, when to move, could mean survival or death. Ramirez spotted one circling left, trying to flank. Left side, she shouted. Davis pivoted, dropping him with 2 clean shots. But in that instant, another fighter rushed from the right, hurling a grenade. Grenade. They dove behind cover as the explosion shook the ridge, dirt and rock raining down. The blast sent Ramirez sprawling, her wound ripping open again. She screamed, clutching her leg, vision blurring. Davis dragged her back, shielding her with his own body. Stay with me, Sarge. Stay with me. Through the haze of pain, Ramirez forced her rifle up again, firing blind bursts. One round struck true, silencing another attacker. But more were coming. Too many. The flare. Ramirez's fingers found something in her vest pocket. A flare. Their last chance. She shoved it into Davis's hand. Fire it, she gasped. He hesitated. They'll see it too. Doesn't matter. Do it. Davis yanked the cap and fired the flare high into the morning sky. It streaked red, hissing as it painted the canyon with desperate light. The fighters below shouted louder, pointing at the flare. Some began climbing faster, determined to finish the fight before reinforcements could arrive. Ramirez's vision swam, darkness creeping in at the edges. She forced herself to stay conscious, teeth gritted. Hold them, she whispered. Just hold them. The flare hissed above them like a burning omen, its crimson glow staining the canyon sky. For Sergeant Elena Ramirez and Corporal Davis, that streak of red was both hope and death. If command saw it, reinforcements might come. If the enemy saw it, and they had, it was a beacon marking their position like a bullseye. The shouts of Taliban fighters echoed up the slope, closer now, sharper. Dozens of voices, boots pounding, the metallic clatter of rifles being chambered. Pinned on a ridge with dwindling ammo, Ramirez forced herself upright against the rocks. Her legs screamed in agony, blood soaking her fresh bandage, but she locked her jaw and raised her rifle. Corporal, she rasped, We hold until they're on top of us. Then we break. Davis shot her a glance, sweat cutting lines through the dust on his face. Break where? We've got cliffs on 3 sides, fighters on the 4th. Then we make our own way out. Her eyes, fierce despite the pallor creeping into her skin, fixed on the slope. They want this ridge? Let them pay for it. The first wave. Gunfire erupted as figures swarmed below, dark silhouettes darting from rock to rock. Davis fired in short, brutal bursts, each shot snapping a target down. Ramirez joined in, her aim deadly precise despite the tremor in her hands. For every fighter that fell, 2 more appeared. Bullets screamed past, chipping stone and showering them with fragments. 2 o'clock. Ramirez barked, spotting movement. Davis pivoted, dropping the man with a controlled double tap. Got him. Another burst of fire raked across the ridge. Ramirez ducked, pressing her helmet hard against the rock. Dust filled her mouth, her lungs burning. They're trying to box us in, Davis growled. Let them try, Ramirez shot back, firing again. But both knew the truth, they were being overwhelmed. Wounded steel. Another explosion rocked the ridge, a grenade landing too close. The blast slammed Ramirez to the ground, the world flashing white. Her ears rang, vision blurred. Through the haze, she felt strong arms grab her vest, dragging her back behind cover. Stay with me, Sarge. Davis's voice cut through the ringing. Don't you dare quit. Ramirez blinked, forcing her eyes to focus. Blood trickled from her temple where shrapnel had grazed her. Her body screamed for rest, for surrender, but her spirit refused. She pushed herself upright, rifle trembling in her hands. I'm still here, she croaked. That's my Sarge, Davis muttered, reloading with quick, sharp motions. The river of bullets. The fight turned desperate. The ridge became a storm of fire, bullets whining past, rocks splintering. Ramirez and Davis fired, ducked, shifted, fought like cornered wolves. But their ammo dwindled, magazines clicking empty faster than they could count. Davis tossed her one of his last spares, his face grim. We're almost dry. Ramirez glanced at the canyon drop behind them. The river far below glistened faint in the morning light. Then we changed the battlefield, she said. Davis followed her gaze, eyes widening. You want to jump? Better than getting torn apart here. He cursed under his breath but didn't argue. The push. Before they could move, more fighters crested the slope, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. Shouts rang out, weapons raised. Ramirez and Davis unleashed their last fury, rifles bucking, each shot measured and merciless. 2 men fell, then a third, but the rest pressed forward. Click. Empty. Ramirez dropped her rifle, drew her sidearm, and fired until the slide locked back. Davis mirrored her, every round a prayer. Then, nothing. Silence, broken only by the enemy's shouts growing louder. They were out.